the older we get, the more and just having done this for so many years, we've placed a lot more value on nutrition over the years. But I think looking back, there was just a lot of just like, oh, you're just fueling when you can. Or in school, I know a lot of athletes that we work with here, they struggle because they're like, I don't have time between practice and between school and things like that. And so they actually do a really bad job like fueling before workouts. And the thing that, as you get older, you start to realize like it actually makes a huge difference how you feel in a workout, how you're fueling. And the timing's a really big factor. So making sure you're having something before and after. And so it's not always so much about the quantity as like when you're doing it. And so that's something that has become really important over the years. So I think like in general, making sure you're having three really good meals throughout a day and then having adequate snacks and timing those snacks around your training appropriately, because sometimes those meals are like 3 hours before you have practice and then it's like you feel terrible. And so even just mapping that out and making sure you have enough fuel to get through those workouts, because you're not going to get anything out of your training if you feel terrible because you didn't fuel properly. And I think that's where like Skylar can probably speak to that a little bit more, but what you're eating beforehand and how you time it is huge. And then making sure you're recovering well, because if you eat a good snack afterwards, you're going to feel better the next day in training too.
Thanks for having me today. So I'm Skylar, the registered dietitian. I actually grew up in Steamboat Springs, Colorado, and it's been fun getting to know Jess and David now that they're locals here. I can just echo too, kind of, and dive maybe deeper into like, what do David and Jess mean by I'm improving my fueling? Like, what are they actually eating, sort of thing, and why? Because absolutely, the timing of it is very relevant. But we can even talk through like some scenarios and the actual types of foods you should choose. So David brought up a point like in summer training, if you're starting at 7 a.m. and maybe you don't want to wake up and give your body like 3 hours of time to digest, because sometimes like if you're eating something really rich, like whether that's like a really protein rich or like fat rich type of meal, that can make our stomach a little bit upset when we're really trying to train intensely. So we do have to give ourselves more time to digest. Or you can choose an option that's a little bit easier to digest. And what I mean by that is usually something that's higher in carbohydrates. So, carbohydrates are the types of foods that our body digests really quickly relative to something like protein and fat. And that's really advantageous for several reasons. One, you don't have to wake up 3 hours before your training session in order to reap the benefits of that food you're going to eat. Two, it's going to absorb into your bloodstream really quickly and give you access to a bunch of fuel when you're actually training. Um, can't quite think of a third reason off the top of my head. Maybe I only wanted to name two, so we'll just go with two for now. But and what I mean by carbohydrates, actually, I'm going to ask you guys a question. What do you think or know are foods that contain carbohydrates? Anything that contains like grains, so like wheat, that's a grain. So like spaghetti, pancakes, those contain flour in them. Fruit contains carbohydrates, rice, tortillas, bread, bagels, oatmeal, kind of those types of foods. Those are going to be your carbohydrate rich type of foods. Potatoes are another one. Um, Even like chips and desserts and cookies and stuff like that. Anything with sugar in it is going to be a carbohydrate type of deal. So say you're in a scenario where you have 7 a.m. training to get to, you wake up at 6:30, and you should definitely not go into that training fasted. And by fasted, I mean like with nothing in your system, especially if you're going to be doing more interval type workouts. Your body needs that hit of carbohydrates. It needs that energy, especially in such like an energy intensive sport like Nordic skiing. So some things you can do are choose carbohydrate sources that contain little to no fiber in them and therefore are going to digest super quickly in your body. Also, something that's going to be a little bit lower in protein and fat, because again, those are a lot slower to digest in our body. And protein, especially, actually doesn't give us energy. Protein's great for building muscle, for like holding together structure in our body, but it's not a great energy source. So before a workout, prioritize carbohydrates. Examples would be like some applesauce, some graham crackers, um, some like a half a bagel or a whole bagel with some peanut butter on there. Um, what are your favorite carb options to fuel with, Jess? I think David just popped off, but
He did. I think bagels are a good one. Um, what else? I mean, I'm a big fan of like literally just bread, so toast beforehand. And I think you bring up such a good point, and it's crazy because I think we had this conversation the other day. I didn't realize, I think I had listened to a podcast on how, when you're carbo loading or you're trying to like eat more carbohydrate, you actually you end up just taking up space with protein and fat. Like it's not really doing much for the workout. And so I think that's been kind of pivotal for me as an athlete and something I'm like, oh wow. And so I feel like what I'm gonna try to do like more is toast with like maybe peanut butter, that kind of thing, instead of trying to add all these other things on beforehand, because it kind of ends up like taking up space in your stomach and not doing that much. Um, but I think simple things like that, graham crackers I've heard brought up a lot, so I might try that one. Um, other options, trying to think of ideas.
like
Like, what do I normally
oatmeal
eat? Oatmeal, yeah.
with banana, even
Yep.
like
Mm-hmm.
honestly grabbing something rather than nothing is going to be
Yeah.
super advantageous. It helps even the fueling before your training can help with just giving you that extra power during your workouts. It can help with training adaptation, even like making sure that you have enough power to fuel, like so you're not just plateauing in your times and intervals that you're trying to hit. So really trying to go in with the mindset of this food is what's going to help me succeed as an athlete. And this food is on my side. I want to prioritize this. Even if I only have 30 minutes to eat, I'm going to have something. And if you only have 30 minutes to eat, choose something that's really easy to digest. So, like a piece of toast with some honey on it, or like we said, applesauce or a banana or some like quick oats, um, graham crackers. If you have more time than 30 to 60 minutes, so say this is like an afternoon workout, then this is also like fueling strategies can change a bit on timing. So say your workout's at like 5 p.m. and you ate lunch at 12. So 12 to 5, that's about 5 hours. That's a little too long to go without any food before a workout. So again, you're kind of in that like similar zone where it's like, all right, I know I'm going to have to prioritize some sort of a snack in between lunch and that workout. So just getting into that mindset of, all right, I should probably, like, I use a rule of thumb of let's try to eat every 3 to 4 hours sort of thing. And then it's about timing those intervals of eating with when you know you're going to be working out sort of thing.
Sweet. Well, thank you. That was very insightful. Kind of gives us a good idea of what we should be doing before practices, like whether it's in the morning or the afternoon. Um, I'm curious kind of just to get your perspective on we as Nordic skiers sort of have different sort of periodization of our training. So like from week to week, month to month, typically our periods last roughly 4 weeks. At least that's pretty typical. But I just was wondering if you could maybe give an overview of like nutrition, maybe some ideas what we could be eating as far as just being endurance athletes, week to week as we're training throughout the summer, especially as we get into like June and July. The volume of our training, the number of hours we train per week goes up pretty significantly. So if you could just add some perspective on maybe like what we can be eating, what's important for us to be taking in. Obviously, carbs and protein are a good one, but then anything
Mhm.
else you can add, and then maybe just some of your experience with just eating and training. I know there's a lot of maybe stigma that surrounds that, so maybe just any explanation you can give for that would be great.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it would be helpful to give an overview even of like um I use something called performance plates with a lot of athletes, which essentially are visual representations of the different proportions of the different types of food groups and how we can adjust those to meet our training needs on a like duration type of basis. So I wish I had the visual to like share on the screen, but I can talk through it. So essentially a performance plate is a meal and you're going to have all the food groups on there. So you're going to have protein, you're going to have carbohydrates, you're going to have something colorful. And by color, I mean anything that contains fiber. So that would be like your veggies, your fruit, things like that. And then you have healthy fats. And the proportions or ratios of those different macronutrients can change based on your training load and how much effort and intensity you're putting into that. So we can use an example of like what a performance plate would look like on more of a rest or easy day versus like a really hard training day, whether that includes intervals or it's just like you're out there for 3 to 4 hours plus type of training situation. And then we can talk about even like the in between in there. So on a rest day or a really easy day, meaning like you're training for less than an hour, it's pretty steady state, like easy, it's manageable type of deal, or it's a rest day. You would want to have your performance plate be about like 50% colorful, fibrous type of foods. So that would be like 50% veggies, fruits. Those are foods like broccoli, lettuce, salad, even like berries, kind of those options. So whatever can add a little bit of color to the plate. And then the other 25% of that plate is going to be that carbohydrate source. So those were the things we talked about, like rice, potatoes, um, spaghetti, pancakes, oats. And then the other 25% of the plate is going to be protein options. So that can look like chicken, steak, eggs, fish, kind of whatever your protein, plant-based options like tofu, beans. Beans have a little bit of carbohydrate in them too, but we won't get that nitty-gritty. You can treat them more as a protein source for this purpose. And then the healthy fat option. So you always want to build healthy fats onto your plate because they do provide sort of that like anti-inflammatory effect in the body, which is really important as an athlete because exercise like definitely increases our inflammatory load in a good way. But it's helpful to have those healthy fats help with that. They also help with our hormones, our brain health, like a number of different things in the body. So that would be like avocado, olive oil, nuts, seeds, coconut oil, like those types of fats. And you want to shoot to, there's not really like a prescribed percentage of the plate, but just making sure that you have something in your meal that contains a healthy fat, whether that's like sprinkling some pumpkin seeds on top of your avocado toast or whatever it is that you're eating. So that would be more of like a easy rest day. And then on a hard day or a really long duration type of exercise day, so this would be like you're exercising over 2 hours or training over 2 hours, or you're doing a really hard interval workout, you would actually want 50% of your plate to, instead of that be veggies and the colorful fibers foods, you're going to want 50% of your plate to be carbohydrates. And again, that's because carbohydrates are our body's preferred source of fuel and energy. So really prioritizing carbs at meals, not only before your workouts, but at meals on those hard training days can be super beneficial. And then you'd kind of switch the percentage of the carbs with the veggies. So instead of 50% veggies, you're going to do more like 25% veggies or fruit, and then 25% protein. So protein will stay pretty consistent. It's really like the carb and the veggies ratio that's going to fluctuate depending on how hard or how long you're training for. And again, it's like, veggies are awesome. We need them. We want them in our diet as athletes. They provide us with those essential vitamins, minerals, those antioxidants, all those great things that are going to keep you healthy, your immune system running really great and strong. But they do contain not a ton of energy in them, and you need a lot of energy as an athlete. And so that's why we adjust the ratios based on your training load, because we want to make sure that you're getting enough energy in. So yeah. Any
And I think, oh, you keep ask, does anyone have questions about that first? Okay. So I guess like awesome description there. And I think it's so important to take what she's saying about the carbohydrates seriously, because I think, and I've seen it a lot with other athletes where they'll fill plates with veggies and it's like at the end of the day that's not actually getting you the energy you need. And especially when like as skiers we're going through these huge high volume chunks, you do need to shift what you're eating to reflect that. And you won't feel great if that's the majority of what you're eating. And I think it's fine if you're maybe like on a rest week or you have a bunch of, like a couple of easier days, things like that. But if you're doing high volume training, like you really need carbohydrates. And I think sometimes something I've heard a lot too is that emphasis on protein being really important. And while it is, I think ultimately like we do need to kind of consider carbs as the main thing. And I think I see that from a lot of athletes. And I think maybe Sky, you can speak to this a little more, but from the recovery standpoint is where I try to think of more of my protein as opposed to like before. And I think that kind of helps guide that a little better because I think we do get a little stuck on protein, but ultimately like as skiers, we're training pretty high intensities and high volumes. And the other thing is with carbohydrates, like they're so important for our tissues and for injury prevention. So if you're not fueling well and you're not giving your body the energy it needs, like you're going to be a lot more susceptible to injuries. So there's that aspect as well. But yeah, if you want to talk to the like protein piece a little more, because I think I just know a lot of athletes that get very into that, and I think it is more valuable like maybe afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think there is this common misconception that protein provides us with energy. And it actually doesn't. It can, but our body doesn't want to use it for energy. Our body only uses protein as a backup mechanism when there's no access to other forms of fuel. And it can be a detriment actually to use protein as energy in our body because it's taking away from our training adaptations and our ability to build muscle and all those great things that we're trying to do as athletes. So overall, it provides us a very insignificant amount of energy. But what it does do for us is it does help with things like muscle protein synthesis or building muscle. It helps build strong bones, which is really relevant as an athlete. We want to protect those bones. It also can help with our immune system health. I think that's something that like goes a little bit unnoticed sometimes with protein, but a lot of the components of our immune system are built out of proteins. And so we want to stay healthy throughout the training season, the racing season. So making sure that we are still meeting our protein needs, but maybe just not timing it like always before a workout. We really want to prioritize protein after a workout. That's actually when it's most like bioavailable to our bodies in some ways. So our muscles are really active during that period after exercise. So that's why if you've ever heard someone say like, gotta eat, within 30 minutes after your training session or your race, that's actually true. We do want to try to prioritize some sort of fueling within that window because our body is still so metabolically active and we're just primed. We're ready to like soak up whatever we give it. So you definitely want to get something in that contains protein. You also want to get in something that contains carbohydrates though. So after a training session or a race, you've depleted your storage of carbohydrates in your body, which is called glycogen. And so you need to refill that. It's almost like you depleted your gas tank in your body and now you need to refill it. And protein's not going to help refill that tank. Protein's going to help like make sure that all your structures are getting rebuilt, but it's not going to help with that energy tank. So that's the part where we can't forget about carbohydrates either. So an option after a training session or a race would just be to have something around that contains both of those. So you've probably heard like chocolate milk or hot chocolate. And so milk contains the protein in it, and then like the chocolate's going to contain the carbohydrates. There's other options too, like having a Greek yogurt with some granola and berries on it. Have like picking up your favorite protein bar or something that's like a little bit more portable. Some athletes too, after like a particularly hard, intense, like high intensity session, you might feel like your appetite is a little low. So certain hormones contribute to that in our body, where like our appetite gets a little blunted. And so it can be hard to sometimes eat right after you're like really hitting those high intensities. So that's where liquid kind of forms of fuel can be super handy, whether it's like chocolate milk or you make yourself a smoothie that contains, whether you put like some Greek yogurt in there, your favorite protein powder. Those can be really easy to digest and a little bit easier on the stomach. So yeah, just trying to get into the habit of like, okay, I just finished my workout or my training session. What can I bring with me for afterwards if I know I have like a 30-minute commute time or whatever it is to get to the next destination where you have your meal. That can be helpful. Jess, what are
And
some of your,
also,
oh,
well,
go ahead.
sorry. Well, I was just gonna say it's so important. Like if I think about, when we race, a lot of times there's back-to-back races. And so that window is so important because if you're not refueling within that window, you kind of lose that. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's so many times when we have like two pretty big races like back to back. And so you need to be getting that like protein and carbs in, and not just doing one or the other. But I think that's when the whole fueling thing becomes, and it goes back to Jake's point of like a bigger training block. It's the same principle, and you're actually training your body for when, like, say Tour de Ski or something, you're racing like 8 times in 11 days or something. Like fueling becomes so important, and you actually train yourself to do that if you're doing that on a regular basis. And so when you have these massive training blocks, like practice these fueling strategies, because then when you go and you have to race like over and over again, it makes a huge difference. And maybe you pull it off for one day, but if you have to stack races, you can't pull it off and you start to feel terrible. So it's a really good opportunity to practice those fueling strategies.
Yeah, I always talk to athletes too, where some athletes will come to me and they're like, man, I can't fuel before a workout. I get a terrible stomach ache or I get really bad GI issues or whatever it is. And it can be sometimes they're just choosing the wrong things to eat. So maybe they're choosing something that is higher in protein or fat and it's just like sitting in their stomach and it's not digesting well. Or I always remind athletes that the gut is a muscle and it can be trained like every other muscle in our body. And so the more we get used to fueling ourselves before a workout, even like during a workout, potentially, if it's really, really long, we can talk about that too some more. And then after a workout, like the easier it's going to be for our body to digest those foods and get used to that process and the less uncomfortable it will be. So, yeah. Jess, what are some of your favorite post-workout or race recovery options?
I actually do love chocolate milk. And I think you bring up a good point with the liquid because, like, I've been making a lot of recovery drinks, just in bringing them with me because I think, especially in the summer, and I know you guys probably deal with this, but like it gets, when it's hot out, you don't really feel like eating the same stuff you do in winter necessarily. So I find like the liquid options, like bringing a recovery drink, and like I said, sometimes I'll have like bars around, but I think that's huge also because you're dehydrated in the summer. So that aspect is like, that's something I've done more and more. Um, and then something you were like just bridging off what you were talking about with training the gut, I think, and I guess we'll get to this, but like fueling throughout your workouts, like the older I've gotten, I've done longer races. And so that's maybe something that I've gotten more into nutrition with that, because you can kind of pull off, um, like you can pull off not eating as well, I guess, in a shorter race, but as it gets longer, you actually like can't finish because you're not eating well enough. But it kind of made me reflect on Nordic skiing a little bit, and I was like, wow, I probably could have been fueling better like before races and even during races. Like some of you probably aren't doing longer races at this point, but you're going to start doing like 15 and 20Ks, which take like an hour. And it's actually beneficial to try and eat something during that time frame, like getting down a goo or like something like that during the race. And I don't think skiers practice it that often. Like we'll have feed stations or whatever, but in retrospect, I'm like, I should have practiced that in my interval training. I should have practiced it even just doing like long distance sessions. But as an athlete, I did not do that very often. I kind of would just suffer through and then eat afterwards. And so that's a whole nother piece. But like just bouncing off what you said about like you can train the gut, like you definitely can. And the more you practice that in training, the more you're going to be able to do it in a race, and it will help your performance. So I don't know if we want to get into that right now, but
Yeah. I mean, I think I don't exactly know what your training is gonna entail this summer in terms of like how long you'll be out there on more endurance-based days, but I use a rule of thumb. It's like, okay, if I'm gonna be out there using my body and putting it through something for over an hour, I'm gonna think about bringing something to fuel myself with. And whether that's like you take a fuel option at about 45 minutes into that, so you feel like you can finish strong. And then that can also further help with our recovery adaptation and our training adaptation. So making sure that the training we're doing is actually sticking with our body and that we're going to see the results rather than just having our body be so depleted and not like really having those results stick. So that's where certain sports nutrition products can come in handy for those really, I would say like longer training sessions. So again, like over 60 to 75 minutes long, that's when you want to start thinking about like, I should probably carry like a sports nutrition drink with me, whether it's something like, I don't know if you guys have used any sort of products. There's a ton out there. So it can be a little bit overwhelming navigating that, but something with electrolytes in it can be helpful. Something that contains carbs can be helpful. There's liquid options, there's gel options, there's little chew options. There's a ton of things out there. So it's all about kind of finding what you like and making sure that that's something that you'll actually eat while you're training. So I'm happy to provide guidance on like specific products, but I don't know if we want to get too in the weeds on that or how we feel about that.
yeah, we can avoid that. But I think it is like
Okay.
that is where those like go like that. I mean, that's when I use those products. And I truly like in retrospect, it's crazy how much I wish I had tried that stuff. And I feel like I just never did before I started doing longer races where I was like, well, I actually physically have to eat. But I feel like training sessions, like I think, like something that's 3 hours long, I used to just be like, well, I'll just suffer through. It's not that long. And now I'm like, I should have eaten something every hour and practice that, because the crazy part is you feel so much better on hour 3 if you do ingest something. And I'm mind blown that it took me like 30 years to figure that out. So so I think it's something to try kind of play with. And like Sky said, you don't need to do it if you're just out for like 30 to 45 minutes. I'm not telling you to like constantly be like having gels every time you go out for a short run, but if you're doing longer stuff, and I think even in interval training, David and I played with it a little bit, trying to do like we were doing a longer interval set, actually having like like a goo or something like that. No product dropping there, but anything like one of those sports products that you would be actually fueling with during a race, because it's hard, and sometimes you'll discover that your stomach goes a little south if you aren't used to it. And so it's just worth getting that practice in.
For camps, would you guys recommend always kind of being loaded with sugar or like snacking on like maybe gummy bears or fruit snacks just to keep up the energy levels?
So, yeah, I think when I think of snacks, I try to encourage athletes to pair at least two food groups together when we look at snacks. So, this is going to depend a little bit on the timing of those snacks. So, if you're, between training sessions at camp and say it's like the afternoon, you're going into the afternoon session, you have about like 2 hours until you're gonna get out there, maybe like 2 to 3 hours. Then you can definitely choose something. I would always encourage you to choose something with carbohydrates, but what else can you pair that with? So something like if you're gonna have some gummy bears or whatever it is, like maybe also having like a handful of nuts with it, like some roasted almonds or cashews or whatever it is. Because that will not only increase the amount of energy that you're intaking as an athlete, which is so important to stay out of that like low energy availability zone, but it also helps our body like better process and like keep those carbs with us so that we're going in to the training session a little bit more fueled. Now, if it's something where like you're only an hour outside or like an hour or 30 minutes outside that training session, keep in mind what I was saying earlier in the talk where it's like, okay, that's the time to choose just something that's carbohydrate heavy. So like skip the nuts at that point. But when we're thinking of snacks in general, I try to like, okay, what are two different food groups we can include in this snack? So like an example would be like crackers and hummus or apple and cheese or like tortilla chips and guacamole. Because then it's like more of a substantial snack too. And I mean, you need that. It's like Nordic skiing is actually one of the most energy intensive forms of exercise and training you can do. I think I was actually recently looking at a study where elite Nordic skiers by far like exceed energy demands and especially like against even elite marathon runners. So it's like just put that in perspective, like yeah, you do need to be eating pretty regularly and being really diligent about making sure that I'm getting in enough fuel consistently throughout the day. And so thinking of, okay, I'm going to have a snack, like how can we add to this to just make it a little bit more optimized and balanced? Does that help answer your question? Cool.
Awesome. Thanks, AJ. That was a good question. I have a question. So I guess thinking back to when I was in high school, my either cross country running or skiing, we always had like pasta parties before the night before a race. And so we'd load up on pasta and bread and salad and stuff like that. I guess for either of you, is that a good idea, a good way to prepare for a race the next day or a weekend of racing? I guess I kind of just went blindly into it and just pounded down pasta and didn't really think about it twice. So just seeing if you have recommendations based off that.
Yeah, good question. I'll answer and then Jess, you can add to it based on your experiences with recent events where you tried a carbo loading kind of thing, like maybe grand traverse. But yeah, so carbo loading or carbohydrate loading is a very like common, well-studied practice when you're gearing up for an endurance event, or a large training block for that matter. So typically, like the old school way of carbo loading was what you were just talking about, where it's like, okay, the night before we have our pasta, we have our garlic bread, and we just like go carb heavy at dinner, pretty much. But the more like research backed, like well studied form of carb loading, now that we've like gotten way more into sports nutrition over the years and just have more access to research, suggests that we can actually gain a lot of benefit from doing almost like a 2 to 3 day carb load session. So even thinking like a little bit earlier than that dinner, I would absolutely say yes, keep eating the carbohydrate heavy dinner, like what we talked about earlier in this session, like veggies and protein and those things, like they take up a lot of space in our stomach, but they're not really providing us with energy. So definitely I would say like the 2 to 3 days even before a major event or race, like just prioritize carbohydrates even more. So at every meal, make sure you have a carbohydrate, every snack, carbohydrate, maybe like up the proportion of it sort of thing, on your plate. And the reason why carb loading is so important is it's helping fill up our gas tank, which is known as our glycogen stores. And our body uses glycogen stores, which is the storage form of carbohydrates, pretty like constantly, but especially during exercise. So, and our glycogen stores are pretty much depleted overnight. So unless we're like actively carbo loading, that can help compensate for that. So that's the point of doing it, is making sure that we're going into any event really like making sure that gas tank is full and topped off, and even more than top, it's overflowing. We'll put it that way. Jess, do you have any advice based on your experience with carbo loading?
Yes. So I have like recently I've tried to do, because I've done some bigger races where I'm like, I really do need a carbo load. And it does, like if you do it correctly, you kind of feel horrible and bloated. And so that can happen. But then I sort of realized, and this is like bouncing off what we've talked about a little bit, I think the mistake some people make is they eat all the other stuff as well. So you're essentially just eating like way more than normal. So there's a lot of space in your stomach being taken up by like veggies and things like that, which are great and very important and part of, you know, a healthy balanced diet. But if you're trying to do a true carbo load, you think of it more as like replacing your calories with carbs, then I guess adding extra carbs. Correct me if I'm wrong with that, but
Yeah.
I think that's maybe like why I felt so bad, is because I was just eating like 10 times more than normal and eating like just, yeah, like way more than I normally would. And that kind of made me feel terrible. And so I think maybe being smarter about it and just remembering that like carbs are what the energy you're going to get, and what you're using for your race. And so just think of it like you're just shifting more of that load, like we talked about earlier. You're shifting more of your plate towards carbs because you're gearing up for an event, not necessarily just eating 10 times more than you normally would, because I think that's a mistake people make and then they feel horrendous like I did. So
Yeah. And fun fact, water is attracted to carbohydrates in the body. So the more that like carbs you're eating, like you will feel a little bit bloated. That's not uncommon, but that's why spreading it out over 2 to 3 days can be helpful too, instead of just doing like a 1 day carb load and like going ham. Like you'll still get a lot of benefits of like increasing your carbohydrate intake over that 2 to 3 day window, and it'll be a little bit easier on the system. You don't have to like eat 90% of your meals or only carbs like the day before. So
yeah.
yeah.
And I feel like I've seen a lot of skiers, like it's like this massive, like there's just so much pasta the night before. And it
Yeah.
kind of backfires because it's like you're trying to get like all this food in like in your one meal beforehand. It's like just be smarter, like eat more carbs spread over those couple days and you won't feel as horrendous and it's more effective. So
Well, sweet. Yeah, that's definitely good to know. I know a lot of these athletes here have some pretty big camps coming up this summer, and they have like kind of these double weekend race series over the winter. So kind of good to know to like, kind of not do or overload everything like the night before, but sort of spread it out, as both Skylar and Jess have said. So thank you for answering the question there. Um, well, sweet. Yeah, I guess anything else that you guys want to add on nutrition? Just any kind of like blanket statements, maybe things that you've done in the past that have helped, or any other sort of ideas you want to throw out there, I think would be good if you have any.
one thing I have is like I have always kind of done this, but I think it is effective and you can bounce off this guy, but like when I have a race, like say it's like a half hour race or something like that, or any race really, I will take something like 15 to 20 minutes before, like, I don't know, a gel or like a bag of those little chomps or something like that. Usually I go like the gel route, but I do think that timing of that's important, like that 15-minute window before, because it'll hit you when you start the race. And I think that is a good, like, that's something I've always done. And I think it is helpful. I don't know if you agree with that, but
Yeah, absolutely. Because what that's doing is it's making sure that like it's topping off your glycogen stores, and it's making sure that your body has active blood sugar flying around your bloodstream, which is what your body's going to use as energy during that race. So you're making your body, or you're allowing your body to do less work in terms of metabolism so that your muscles can do, and your aerobic capacity and like your respiratory system can do all the work that you want it to do, and focus less time and attention on like, where do I get all the fuel that you're asking me to use right now? So absolutely, yeah, getting in the habit of whether it's, yeah, gel, chew, or like your favorite sports drink that has carbohydrates in it. That can be really helpful. Yeah. In terms of like a blanket statement, I guess, about nutrition is I would just encourage you as much as you can as an athlete to really just get in the mentality that, food it's on your side. It's your friend. It's like what's helping you give your body the tools it needs to be a successful athlete. It's going to help with longevity in the sport. It's going to help make you a better athlete. It's going to make you stronger, faster, all those things. And, if you're ever confused about nutrition or you hear someone say something like carbs are bad or something, just really be careful about certain inflammatory comments like that. And consult a professional. Like you can reach out to me as a registered dietitian or whoever is in your corner that you can trust who has credibility and like actual training in this area. Because there are a lot of opinions out there. But unfortunately, those opinions can sometimes lead to not great scenarios as an athlete where maybe you're unintentionally not fueling yourself enough because of something that someone said about a certain food group or type of food. And then you notice like, oh man, I'm like feeling slower in training. Like, why is this happening? So yeah, look at food as like a wonderful resource for you and not something to be feared or get super anxious about. In the end, it's just about maintaining enough energy in the body and making sure that we're staying fed and fueled.
Yeah, that I totally agree with that. And I think it's crazy, like with social media and everything, and you're going to run into it with teammates. You're going to have so many opinions and things thrown at you about food. And it's important to like, if you have questions about it, reach out to someone who's a professional and knows what they're talking about because there's so much on the internet. It's overwhelming. And yeah, it is on your side. And, if you learn how to fuel properly for skiing, it really does help you. So
Yeah, I
Good.
feel like I know more now, and I've been doing this for a while. So, thank you both very much for your insights. And yeah, for those watching now or watching the recording, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions that come up, and I can get them to Jess and Skylar and David and get back to you with an answer. So, yeah, we're always open for questions if they come up at a later time. But yeah, so thanks again to Skylar and Jess. Thanks to David. I know you had to head out a little early, but yeah, and thank you all for joining. It was great having you. Hope you learned some stuff, took some notes, and yeah, have a great rest of your night. Thank you.